the neuroscience of people who quietly escape the rat race, and why most never do. You're 31 years old. You make $74,000 a year. That's more than 63% of American workers. And you still feel broke. Not broke. You pay your bills. You have a car, an apartment, maybe even a 401k you opened 2 years ago and haven't checked since. But there's this math you do every Sunday night. You open your bank app, you look at the number, you subtract what's coming out this month, and what's left never feels like enough. You tell yourself it's the economy, the rent, the cost of living, and those things are real. But here's what nobody is telling you. The reason most people can't escape this cycle has almost nothing to do with their income. The research shows it has everything to do with what sustained financial stress does to the physical structure of your brain, and why some people's brains are wired to escape while most never do. Mind Expansion Lab ran the numbers. Here's what the science actually found. 1. The tunnel your brain builds. In 2013, a team of researchers from Harvard and Princeton published a paper in the journal Science. They recruited people across a wide range of income levels and gave them IQ and cognitive function tests. The finding was striking. People under significant financial strain scored the equivalent of 13 IQ points lower than people who weren't. Not because they were less intelligent, because financial stress builds something researchers call a cognitive tunnel. Your brain, when it perceives a threat, real or imagined, begins allocating its processing power toward that threat. Under chronic financial pressure, that means your working memory, your attention, and your decision-making capacity are all being partially consumed by the background process of not having enough. Every choice you make, what to eat, whether to buy something, how to respond to an email, gets filtered through a lens that's asking, can I afford this? What does this cost? Am I okay? The science says, scarcity doesn't just feel like less. It leaves you with less mind. And here's what makes it a trap. The tunnel makes it harder to think about the future, so you make more short-term decisions. Those short-term decisions deepen the financial pressure. The deepened pressure narrows the tunnel further. Your brain does this automatically. It's not a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism that has not been updated since you were running from predators on the African savanna. The people who quietly escape the rat race are not smarter than you. What they did was find a way to widen the tunnel first before trying to change anything else. 2. The 3 a.m. chemical. You know the feeling. You wake up at 3:17 in the morning and your first thought is money. Not a specific bill, not a concrete problem. Just money. A formless, nameless pressure that sits on your chest and doesn't lift until your alarm goes off 4 hours later. What's happening in your brain during that moment is chemically precise. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, is firing, triggering a cortisol release. Cortisol is your primary stress hormone. In small, acute doses, it's adaptive. It makes you alert, focused, ready to respond. But cortisol was designed for short-term threats. A predator, a fight. Something that resolves. Financial stress doesn't resolve. It runs in the background for months, for years. And chronic cortisol exposure, the kind that comes from sustained financial anxiety, does something neuroscientists call cortical thinning, specifically in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that plans, that delays gratification, that thinks about next year instead of next weekend. It's the part that would tell you, in the middle of a tiring Friday, to move $250 into savings instead of spending it on things that feel like relief. The research shows people who experience long-term financial stress have measurably thinner prefrontal cortices. The biological machinery for long-term thinking gets worn down by the exact stress that requires long-term thinking to escape. This is why willpower-based advice doesn't work. Just spend less. Just save more. Those instructions arrive at a brain that has been chemically compromised from the very behavior they are asking for. The people who escape the rat race don't do it through discipline. They restructure their environment so the cortisol load drops first. Then the prefrontal cortex starts working again. Then the long-term decisions become possible. 3. The story your brain tells about you. Here's a question. When you think about money, not in a polished, public way, but in the honest, private way. What's the first thing that comes to mind? For most people, it's something like complicated, stressful, something other people understand better than me. Or quieter than that, a feeling of being someone for whom wealth is meant for someone else. Someone who came from the right background, who made the right choices earlier. Someone who isn't you. This is what neuroscientists call a financial self-schema. It's a stored pattern in your brain's default mode network, the DMN, about who you are in relation to money. The default mode network activates whenever you're not focused on an external task. It's the part of your brain running in the background, processing your identity, your relationships, your sense of self. And if your financial self-schema says, "I am someone who struggles with money," your default mode network rehearses that belief thousands of times per day, in the half second before you decide whether to open a savings app, in the Sunday night math, in the way you explain your financial situation to a friend. Your brain does this. It filters incoming information to confirm what it already believes about you. Every small financial win gets minimized, rationalized, attributed to luck. Every setback feels like evidence, not because the setback is larger, because it fits the narrative the DMN has been running on loop. Now here's what the people who quietly escape the rat race do differently. They don't start by changing their behavior. They start by changing the story, not with affirmations, not with vision boards, with repeated, small, verifiable actions that produce a different kind of evidence. Research from MIT on identity-based habit formation found that behavior change anchored to identity, "I am someone who builds things," is 3 times more durable than behavior change anchored to willpower, "I am going to try to save money." The first one updates the self-schema. The second one fights it. 4. What escaping actually looks like by the time you're looking at someone who has quietly escaped the rat race, who works because they want to, not because they have to. You're seeing the visible result of a neural process that started years earlier and was invisible to almost everyone around them. What they did was not extraordinary. The science says it was surprisingly ordinary. First, they reduced the cognitive load of financial decisions. They automated the ones that mattered, not because they were sophisticated investors, because they understood that the prefrontal cortex is a limited resource, and automation makes the right choice the default choice. They didn't decide to save every month. They made it so they never had to decide. At 28 years old, you set up a transfer of $317.50 per month to an index fund. Not because you have extra money, because you restructured the month so the money moves before you can spend it. The cognitive load of that decision drops from a monthly willpower exercise to a one-time setup, and you never have to fight your own brain over it again. Second, they changed the thing their dopamine system rewards. Stanford's research following up on delayed gratification studies found something important. People who successfully delay gratification are not exercising more self-control. They have less desire for the immediate reward. Over time, through repeated experience, they've restructured their brain's reward signal to associate future outcomes with present pleasure. The account going up feels good. The purchase feels less necessary. This doesn't happen through discipline. It happens through exposure, small wins, repeated consistently, that rewire what the brain reaches for. Third, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, they stopped measuring their financial progress in net worth and started measuring it in evidence of who they are becoming. The identity shift doesn't come from reaching a number. It comes from the accumulation of small decisions that confirm a different self-schema. People who escape the rat race often can't point to a single turning point. The change was compounding in their prefrontal cortex, one decision at a time. In the background, 5. The Quiet Multiplier Mind Expansion Lab ran the numbers on what this actually looks like over time. You're 31. You automate $317.50 a month. You're not cutting every expense. You're not becoming a different person overnight. You're doing one thing, making the savings decision 0 effort. At 7% average annual return, compounding monthly in 10 years, that's $54, 892, 37. In 20 years, $196, 447, 22. But here's what the number doesn't show. The person who has been making that automated decision for 10 years is not the same person who set it up at 31. Over 10 years of consistent small wins, the self-schema has updated. The default mode network tells a different story. The cortisol load is measurably lower because the threat is less constant. The prefrontal cortex, no longer under chronic chemical attack, begins making better long-term decisions elsewhere, in your career, your relationships, your health. The science says, the compound interest that matters most is not financial, it's neurological. The money multiplies, but the person is the multiplier. 6. The day everything shifts, there isn't one. This is the part that surprises people the most when they hear it from someone who has made it out. They expect to describe a morning where they woke up and knew something had changed. A moment where the rat race officially ended and something else began. What actually happens is a Tuesday. You check your account not out of anxiety but out of habit. The number is there. It's fine. It was fine last week. It will be fine next week. The Sunday night math that used to consume an hour of your nervous system has disappeared so gradually you didn't notice it was gone. That's what the research shows financial security actually feels like from the inside, not the arrival of a feeling, the absence of one that used to be constant. You don't feel rich. You feel quiet. And that quiet, if you've spent years in the tunnel, is the most disorienting, unfamiliar, and quietly extraordinary thing you will ever feel. 7. Your brain 2 years from now, you're still 31. Nothing dramatic has happened. You made one automated transfer. You had a few small wins. You tracked the evidence instead of the number. But this is what your brain looks like 2 years from now if you do only that. Cortisol levels, in people who reduce ongoing financial stress through structural changes rather than willpower, show measurable reductions within 6 to 12 months. Lower cortisol correlates directly with improved sleep quality, better executive function, and significantly higher performance in complex decision-making, all of which, statistically, correlate with increased income over a 5-year horizon. The prefrontal cortex, given adequate conditions, lower chronic stress, consistent positive feedback, reduced cognitive load, shows neuroplasticity. The thinning that happens under sustained financial pressure is not permanent. The brain that spent 5 years making 10,000 short-term decisions under cortisol pressure can rebuild the circuitry for long-term thinking, not through a retreat, through changed conditions. And the default mode network, the background process that has been quietly whispering this is just who you are with money every day for years, begins to update its model. Not because you forced it to, because the evidence changed. You made the automated transfer. It happened 12 times, then 24 times. The account balance went up. The threat signal weakened. The story changed to fit the data. This is not a story about getting rich. The people who quietly escape the rat race are not, mostly, extraordinarily wealthy. They are mostly ordinary people who live without the specific dread that most people carry every Sunday night. Free to say yes to something without calculating first. Free to call their mother and take her to dinner and not think about the bill for the rest of the night. Free to go to sleep at 11 p.m. without a 3 a.m. wake-up scheduled by their own nervous system. That freedom is not bought. It's built inside the brain, one quiet decision at a time, over more time than you think and less time than you fear. If you're 28 or 34 or 42 and you recognize yourself somewhere in this video, leave a comment with one thing you're going to automate this week. Not because the action is the point, because writing it down is the first time your prefrontal cortex and your default mode network have been asked to agree on something. And that agreement is how it starts. If this kind of science-backed breakdown is what you're looking for, subscribe. The next video goes deeper into the specific neural mechanisms behind why intelligent people make the worst financial decisions, and what the research says actually changes them.